Coming up now, we take a look back at the 1964 Republican National Convention in San Francisco. In the next hour and a half, former Vice President Richard Nixon speaks to the delegates, and Senator Barry Goldwater accepts his party's nomination for president. First, however, join us as we talk to William Rusher, one of the individuals responsible for the Draft Goldwater movement.
William Rusher, what did the 1964 Republican Convention mean for the conservative wing of the Republican Party?
That was the convention at which the conservative movement took over the Republican Party. And while after Goldwater's defeat that November, many people thought that it was a very transient takeover, in point of fact, it wasn't. It has lasted with modifications ever since. It was the change in control of the party from the eastern, relatively liberal, or as they would like to call it, moderate leadership of the party under Nelson, Rockefeller, and so on, to the west and the south.
What were the factors in those years that brought about that change?
Well, there was a demographic shift of population. The people were actually moving out of the northeast to the south and the west, so that the south and the west were becoming relatively more important than they had been in terms of electoral votes, and relatively more conservative. The people who were moving out there were people who were kind of individualists and wanted to do things on their own. Then, too, the mid-1960s, which is the period we're talking about, were a period of great social turmoil in the United States. We had riots, we had a little bit later the Vietnam War, we had the sexual revolution in all its varieties. We had a great many things that were causing people who had been, in many cases, Democrats, to question their allegiance to a party that was now in the hands of liberals with whom they didn't feel comfortable. And the Goldwater candidacy was conceived by those who backed it as an attempt to bring those people into a new anti-liberal coalition.
In a recent interview, Senator Goldwater said that he really didn't want to run for president in 1964. What motivated him?
Well, it's true that he didn't, because he felt that as against Kennedy, he didn't have a very good chance. And then when Kennedy was assassinated and he had to run against Johnson, he was convinced he had no chance. And it's true, too, that he had to give up his Senate seat, or felt he did, in honor, have to give it up in order to run. He couldn't run for both, although nowadays other people do. Senator Benson's running for both vice president and senator from Texas, and Lyndon Johnson had done the same thing. But Goldwater felt that he had to give it up, and so he was literally going to be out of the Senate if he didn't get the presidency. And he kept on, as he has explained in others of his books, because he felt he could not let down the people, particularly the young people, who believed in him. There were a lot of people who got interested in politics and into activism in one way or another, Young Americans for Freedom, people like that, who just plain counted on Barry Goldwater. He couldn't let them down.
Governor William Scranton of Pennsylvania headed up the so-called Stop Goldwater movement. What was all of that all about?
Well, by the time of the convention, this was enough into the modern era so that we were in that situation where we knew what was going to happen. We knew that Barry Goldwater was going to win, and win on the first ballot. The delegates were there. They'd been credentialed, and there was no way this was going to be stopped. But of course, the relatively liberal Republicans, the opposition to Goldwater, were not on that account going to just plain quit the party or lie down without a fight. So they decided they weren't going to win, they were going to have some fun, or a kind of ill-tempered kind of fun. The Scranton candidacy with the Stop Goldwater movement, was the attack that Scranton launched in a letter that he delivered to Goldwater, were intended to hurt, intended to slow down the conservatives, but they knew perfectly well they wouldn't win. And that was true also of the resolution that Hugh Scott introduced in the convention,
which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. Congressman William Miller of New York was Senator Barry Goldwater's running mate. Who was he? What did he bring to the ticket?
William Miller was a congressman from Buffalo, New York, who was also chairman of the Republican National Committee at that time. And Goldwater, in picking him, I think was rather intelligently picking someone who would, to some degree, balance the ticket geographically, because Goldwater's from Arizona, Miller was from New York. Miller, too, was from the orthodox heart of the Republican Party, being its chairman, so that in that sense he tended to counter any idea that Goldwater was some kind of radical extremist who had taken over. And he was a loyal Republican, and he was willing to do it.
We have a piece of tape of Congressman William Miller delivering his vice presidential acceptance speech. Now, Mr. Miller is talking about former President Eisenhower. We want to show our viewers that piece of tape, so here it is.
My fellow Republicans, 4 years have passed since the most beloved American in the world retired from the presidency to his farm at Gettysburg. During his Republican administration, loyally supported by the Republicans in the Congress, this nation had a new birth of freedom, a new dignity in the community of nations, and a new strength and domestic tranquility at home. His inspiration and his example permeate our party. His inspiration and his example guide us still. And as he indicated 2 evenings ago, he stands ready with all other Republicans to join with us in once again carrying forward our commitments for the well-being of every human being.
Mr. Rusher, was Congressman Miller an effective campaigner?
I certainly don't remember him as ineffective. The campaign wasn't very successful, that we know. I don't think it was Bill Miller's fault. Yes, I think he was a good and a loyal Republican.
Let's move on to, you brought up the Senator Hugh Scott amendment to the platform. This was an amendment which denounced efforts by the John Birch Society, the KKK, and the Communist Party for infiltrating the Republican Party. Why did Senator Scott offer the amendment? What was all that about?
Well, there was a good deal of mischief in Senator Scott's amendment, and in fairness, I can see why it roused the opposition it did and why the Goldwater forces defeated it. The Communist Party was obviously everybody's enemy. The KKK was everybody's enemy. It was a racist, explicitly racist organization for which neither Barry Goldwater nor any true conservative had any use. John Birch Society was composed of people who were by no means, certainly not trying to overthrow the government, certainly not, according to all their publications, racist at all. They were very suspicious that the communists were behind everything. When anything went wrong, it tended, in their opinion, to be a communist plot. Now, a lot of people disagreed with that. But to adopt a resolution systematically and equally attacking the Communist Party, the KKK, and the John Birch Society was really being unfair to people whose worst mistake was that they were simply wrong on an analysis of where the difficulty lay. I think most of us felt that the problem wasn't the communists in the United States, it was the liberals. But they thought it was the communists. Well, it's a free country. They could say that without having themselves denounced and read out of the Republican Party along with the KKK and the communists. So that, but the Scott and Rockefeller and the liberal Republicans, by introducing that resolution, were attempting to embarrass the Goldwater forces, make them either appear to be voting against denouncing the communists or in favor of it, in which case they'd have to denounce the John Birch Society too. But as I said, at that point there was no way they could prevent the convention from nominating Goldwater, so it was intended to embarrass and to hurt him.
When Governor Rockefeller rose to speak in favor of the amendment, what happened?
Well, he went on for a brief time, and then a lot of boos and so on interrupted his speech. He was not a very popular man with the majority of the people in the hall. There is a rather interesting point, though, to be made. When the boos came, Cliff White, the campaign manager for Goldwater, in his trailer outside the hall, pushed a button which enabled him to communicate instantly with, I think, 15 positions on the floor. And he said, "Don't have our delegates booing Governor Rockefeller." He thought that it was just in bad taste, and after all, Rockefeller was defeated anyway in terms of the convention. But they said, "We're not booing. Our delegates are sitting perfectly still here. It's the stands. It's the crowds up in the stands that nobody was controlling who were doing the booing." And I think that's true. There were an awful lot of Goldwater people out there, no question about it, and they didn't like Nelson and Rockefeller, and I could see why. I didn't either. I may have been booing, I don't know.
All right, let's take a look at that piece of tape. We now jump into the middle of the third session of the 1964 convention. Senator Hugh Scott of Pennsylvania rises to offer the so-called extremism amendment, and then you'll hear a portion of Governor Rockefeller's speech in favor of that amendment. So here it is.
The chair recognizes to offer the first of these amendments, Senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Hugh Scott. Mr. Chairman, I offer as an amendment to this platform, which by and large is an excellent platform of which all Republicans can be proud and can proudly differ as to sections if they so wish. After all, this is not a Democratic convention. I therefore move that the following language be inserted as a new full paragraph between the present 6th and 7th paragraphs under the section, quote, headed for the section headed, quote, for a free people, unquote. This language, the Republican Party fully respects the contribution of responsible criticism and defends the right of dissent in the democratic process. But we repudiate the efforts of irresponsible extremist groups such as the Communists, the Ku Klux Klan, the John Birch Society, and others.
We can make it out from here is coming entirely from the delegations in the east.
Our party, by their efforts to infiltrate positions of responsibility in the party, or to attach themselves to its candidates. Mr. Chairman, I now yield 5 minutes. I'll refer the time until it has...
The amendment is before the committee under the rules. There's 1 hour for debate. The chair hopes it's not going to be taken.
20 minutes.
No. Chair hopes that it will not all be taken, and the time is in control of the chairman of the Resolutions Committee, to whom does the gentleman yield time?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to yield 5 minutes to a proponent of the amendment, the governor of the state of New York, Governor Rockefeller.
This is what Governor Rockefeller has been waiting for all these hours. shouting are coming from the delegations from New York, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Vermont, that's all I can see.
Delegates, please take their seats so that the governor can be heard. We are under limitation of time. The governor of New York is recognized for 5 minutes, and please give him your attention.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Laird, fellow delegates, alternates, and friends, I move that the language read by Senator Scott be inserted in the proposed 1964 Republican platform. The time has come for the Republican Party to face this issue realistically and take decisive action. It is essential that this convention repudiate here and now any doctrine doctrinaire militant minority, whether communist, Ku Klux Klan, or Bircher.
Nolan, that was, California leader for Goldwater.
Which would subvert this party to purposes alien to the very basic tenets which gave this party birth.
Senator Dirksen of Illinois.
As President Eisenhower said only 2 hours ago from this very rostrum, the Republican Party should reject extremism from either the left or the right. Precisely 1 year ago today, on July 14th, 1963, I warned that the Republican Party is in real danger of subversion by a radical, well-financed, highly disciplined majority. A minority wholly alien to the sound and honest conservatism that has firmly based the Republican Party in the best of a century's tradition. Wholly alien to the sound and honest Republican liberalism that has kept this party abreast of human needs. That has kept this party abreast of human needs in a changing world. Wholly alien to the broad middle course that accommodates the mainstream of Republican principles. This year, I have crisscrossed this nation, fighting for these principles, fighting to keep the Republican Party, the party, fighting to keep the Republican Party the party of all the people. And warning of the extremist threat It's danger to the party.
We're going to have several speakers here on various amendments. We must proceed in an orderly manner. I think it's only fair and right to all concerned.
It's danger to the party and it's danger to the nation. The methods of these extremist elements I have experienced at first hand. Their tactics have ranged from cancellation by coercion of a speaking engagement before a college to outright threats of personal violence.
Not my fault if you don't control the audience. I got 5 minutes worth. You control the audience and I'll make mine 5 minutes.
William Rusher, at the time all of this was going on, when Governor Rockefeller was speaking, what was going through your mind? What was the atmosphere in the hall? What were you feeling?
Well, there was a good deal of resentment. Nelson Rockefeller was the enemy to us, particularly those of us who came from New York State. This man was trying, as we saw it, to turn the Republican Party into a poor imitation of the Democratic Party, and we were conservatives. We had a totally different destiny in mind for the Republican Party, and as I said, what's more, he knew perfectly well he couldn't win in the convention there, so that everything he was doing was intended just to hurt. So that we resented it, I think it's fair to say.
And the outcome of this particular amendment, it was defeated.
It was defeated.
All right, coming up for our viewers is Senator Goldwater's acceptance speech in 1964. What's memorable about that speech for you?
Well, unfortunately, the only thing that is memorable about it in the sense of having gone into the history books is that remark about extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and so on. Moderation, the pursuit of virtue, and so on.
Let me read it just so our viewers know to look for it. He said, "I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice, and let me remind you also that moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue."
That's right. I knew at the time what he was saying. I understood it. I had no problem with it. And he has said many times since that he can't, for the life of him, to this day, see what's wrong with it, and neither can I. Now, both of us must be a little extra stupid because Cliff White, who was his campaign manager and one of my oldest friends, says he knew the very night and moment it was uttered that it was a mistake. But if it was a mistake, it was only a mistake in the sense that it seemed to be defending extremism on the right, which at the time was closely associated with the John Birch Society, which had been spotlighted in Hugh Scott's resolution. And so that Goldwater seemed to be endorsing a kind of extremism, which then everybody would use against him in his campaign. And perhaps that was undoubtedly it was a political mistake in the sense that the media all instantly leaped on and said, "Oh, what a horrible thing to say." In point of fact, I think it wasn't even original. It's a variation of some statement that I think goes back to Roman times. But you couldn't have told the opposition or the media that. They had something they wanted to fuss about, and they fussed.
What was the reaction to his speech in the hall?
Oh, very favorable. When a man is nominated by a majority, as a matter of fact, Nelson Rockefeller at one point in the little clip you have of him misspeaks and calls it a majority. When a majority of the delegates, a majority in the hall is for a man, and he comes forward to accept the presidential nomination and makes a good, hard-hitting speech, they're going to be enthusiastic, and they were. And they received him very warmly indeed.
Former Vice President Nixon introduces Senator Goldwater at this convention, which we will see in a couple of minutes. Now, as a candidate for president in 1960 himself, Where was Richard Nixon in 1964?
Well, Nixon, you'll recall, had run for governor of California in 1962 and had been defeated by Pat Brown, the father of Governor Edmund Brown, later became governor. And so at that point then, he had moved east and, as he thought, maybe shaken the dust of politics from his feet. He was going to be a corporation lawyer and make money in New York and Wall Street. But he was fascinated by politics, and he couldn't stay away from it, and he was a regular Republican. And when Barry Goldwater, who needed all the help he could get from known figures in the Republican Party, asked him, I guess, to introduce him, Nixon saw that here was an opportunity to be a regular Republican and do something that the conservatives might later be grateful for. And incidentally, Goldwater was. It was the best investment Nixon ever made, because it turned Goldwater for many years into a devoted fan of Nixon's who supported him for the presidency in 1968 over Reagan, and persuaded many other people to do the same. Now, Barry Goldwater later still changed his mind about Richard Nixon, and some of the really vintage profanity in this country has been uttered by Goldwater on the subject of Nixon. But at this time, Nixon did something which Goldwater appreciated and which Goldwater later repaid many times over.
Well, on that note, we go to Senator Barry Goldwater's acceptance speech in 1964. First, you'll see former Vice President Richard Nixon introducing the candidate, and you'll hear a portion of that speech, which lasts about 15 minutes. So now we go to Richard Nixon. He is in the process of making some comments about the press in the United States. Here's his speech.